He said, I think the lines between design and development will continue to blur more and more, and ultimately we'll all just become makers.
And he calls great designers people who not just conceptualize, but actually tinker around and turn the thing into a reality. Someone like inventing on the ground floor, more like your.
Hey, welcome everyone. This is the first Twitter Space, X Space I've hosted. I'm excited for this format. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So first off, a little introduction about me. I'm the founder of Lead Scout. I've been doing UX design and tangential things to UX in the entrepreneurial space for over 15 years now. I've worked with a lot of large organizations, small startups, and my focus is always getting things to be real, getting things to be traction. But this space has been created not to talk about me. It was created as a reaction to a tweet by Fons Mans earlier this morning. Woke up to it actually, and he said I think the lines between design and development will continue to blur more and more, and ultimately, we'll all just become makers. That got me thinking, man. I stewed on that this morning. I was thinking a lot about how the trends of tools today is making everything more accessible, making everything more accessible for design, more accessible for developers, development more accessible for designers, but more so actually making design and development accessible for those that are not experts in the space. So it's this really intriguing trend that we're seeing, and I definitely think that we are headed in a direction where this is going to be become a trend where more people are in the space, more people are designing, more people are developing. Hey, welcome, Sam. Good to see you, buddy. Hey, let's see if you want to be up on stage, let me know. Just give me a quick a message here, and I can pull you up on stage. Right now, it's just a couple of us in here. Hopefully more people join. There was a couple of people that DM'd me earlier today that said they might want to join. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was really the traditional barriers that I see, in the space that we see in the space between developers and designers. I mean, a lot of times, you'll see designers working with developers. They might not know what's possible in tech, right? You have a designer that's sitting there designing something that is beautiful and meaningful in their minds, but the developers can't go and code it, and that becomes a problem. So that's classically been a barrier to creating good design that can actually become real in the world. Designing things, a lot of times that makes things just not really realistic to deliver in time as well. I think Figma has lowered that barrier a lot. It's made exports a lot easier, practically speaking, made logistics a lot easier for designers to deliver this stuff to the developers, and developers to collaborate with their designers. But you see developers getting lost in Figma and stakeholders getting lost in Figma too. So that there's still a barrier of entry there. But as we think about how design and development are going to continue to blur moving forward, and we'll each become a developer, or we'll each become a designer, or product managers will become a designer or a developer. These non-technical people joining the space. There's some really interesting trends that are developing. So one of the things that I look at here is the tools that are launching left and right to attack this. Some are enabled by AI, many are not. Of course, we have design on the Figma front. Figma has just been an incredible tool for that continues to expand, and it continues to make new forays into things like dev mode, and continuing to have more opportunities on the prototyping front to make things more real. I think it's obviously they're leading the charge. And you see so much activity on the Framer and Webflow no code front these days too. So when it comes to websites, specifically Framer and Webflow seem to be the reigning supreme, making website development something that designers can now do. There's every a Twitter account in design Twitter now is talking about how they're now a Framer developer or a Webflow developer, right? But they're more so than that. Let's think about the stack of an app, because this is really intriguing to me. A stack of a technical application. Let's start with a database. So traditionally, you would it was a fairly technical effort to get a database up and running. But now we have all these tools, whether it be Airtables or Tadabase, Baser, etc. There's so many Zano. There's so many tools out there to build a database in a no-code kind of format, and anybody can do this. In fact, I was just talking to an accountant. He was an accountant for a home services contractor, a roofer specifically. And he's a super bright guy, and he decided to, he saw a lot of inefficiencies in this roofing company, not just on the accounting space, but he saw some process inefficiencies. And so he took it upon himself to create an app for this roofer to make things more efficient. And when I say things, I'm talking about customer relationships, etc. So he essentially created a CRM for this roofer. How did he do it? He doesn't know anything about code. Well, the first thing he did was he tried to hire somebody who knew about code. And what he realized really quickly was developers and designers are super expensive. And so he started to look into no-code tools. And he utilized Airtables, as a database. Then he said, well, a lot of the data I have in here is really meaningful, but it's a little bit hard to consume. How can I make this more meaningful for my customer, this roofer? And so he went out and he looked at no code tools for creating a front end that can surface that data. And what he happened upon was Bubble. A lot of us are probably familiar with Bubble.io. There's a bunch of them out there, Retool or Builder or Adalo. Heck, I've even seen people using Xcode for front end stuff these days. But Bubble is a great no code tool for apps that you can ingrain some logic in. And so he utilized Bubble as this front end, and he started to pull data into a web app, okay? But then he said, a big part of a customer management system is actually, getting data from other sources too. You might have a project management tool or a photos tool, or you might have a pricing or proposal tool. How do you pull that information into the customer management system in a live way? And so he again was thinking about developers, but then he realized I can do this with this tool that I've heard of called Make. Okay, if you've ever heard of Make or Zapier, they're tools for syncing data between platforms, essentially acting like a no-code API. And so he utilized Make, and this guy gave me a tour of his software recently, and it's insane over the course of the last 9 months what he's been able to accomplish. And he has no intention of redeveloping this anytime soon, doing it in traditional code stack. Like, is he going to be the next Uber? No, he's not going to be the next mythical startup, unicorn startup. But has he developed a custom piece of software that makes optimizes revenue, makes his clients more profitable, accomplishes some really real world stuff? Yes, absolutely. He's offered a ton of value. And he did that all with no code stuff. The guy had never touched design, never touched development before in his life. He's an accountant and was able to do that. So I see that as being this, and maybe the blur is not so much between design and developers. That's for sure happening. The interesting thing for me is the space is expanding at an exponential rate. A little bit scary. I mean, I'm a designer by trade. I'm looking at people, are they going to all come and eat my lunch, right? But the space is expanding. We're going to get all sorts of new people here that are developing products. So on an optimistic note, things are going to become much more accessible. There's going to be more creative thought in the space than we've ever seen, because we have all these different people who haven't really had a seat at the table for design in the past, but now have a seat at the table. Imagine when your non-technical uncle can contribute to the design process. How does that change things? I think back to what we were all taught, and as we're coming up with human-centered design, and how we always talk about how the more voices at the table, diversity of voices at the table makes for stronger products. We talk about that being true, but we're going to be able to feel that now because we're going to have everybody and their uncle at the table contributing to the design process now. So if you have any anecdotes or stories, I'd love to hear them as anybody who's participating. And again, hey, welcome. I mean, if you're in the space and you want to contribute, feel free to poke the channel and we can get you on stage. So let's talk a little bit about the rise of the full stack designer, because I think that's been a trend too. That's taken the front stage recently. Like, what does this future maker look like? Again, we're talking about the tweet I was looking at earlier today. I think the lines between design and development will continue to blur more and more. Ultimately, we'll all just become makers. So what does that maker look like? So here's my take on it, and I'd love to hear your perspectives too. I think we are all going to be prompt engineers to start, all right? We're all going to have to be prompt engineers to start. Because of the onset of AI, it's not going to really affect the final product in a big way, but it's going to give people speed to entry, speed to head start, give people speed to jump to higher fidelity quicker. Okay, so we can look at this. A simple example here is there's a tool I've been playing around with today, Galileo.ai. Galileo is, I mean, it's your classic AI design tool. Okay, so it gives mediocre UI, but you know what it does? It makes that accessible for people that don't know how to do UI, or if you're kind of struggling with a little bit of designer block, you can quickly get through that designer block with a series of prompts. But even in a more granular way, I think of basic web design, right? So web design used to be this process of thinking through the assets and the content you're going to put on the page, right? And then having to organize a photo shoot, having to organize little assets to icons and iconography and stuff. So AI has enabled it to be a lot quicker to generate assets like that. Okay, so and then these no code tools on top of that have also made it quicker to launch those websites. So the speed to getting something up and running has just fallen off a cliff. It's so much faster to get stuff up and running. And I think the people that are able to take advantage of that, become prompt engineers in their own right, to some degree, can get started. A simple example in my own life that I'm seeing, so I manage the startup Lead Scout, where we service the home improvement space. We do lead generation for the home improvement space and have a mobile app and a web app for home service contractors. A basic thing, we have a help center, right? Contractors, when they have an issue with the tool, they'll go to the help center. When they have questions about the tool, they'll go to this help center. It used to take me a lot of time to write the help center content until I created a GPT bot for it. Okay, so I created a GPT bot for writing help center content for our help center. That bot has a format. It integrates links into it. It generates a little template for a video and a format for video. It does a lot of the bulk of the lifting for this. And I taught the bot about our service. So it knows all about Lead Scout. It knows what our value is and what our business angle is and all that stuff. And so anytime I need a new Help Center article, instead of having to sit down for half an hour and write that, I quick ping the bot, say, hey, I need a Help Center article we just launched this new feature, search. I need a Help Center article talking about search. Here's 3 things that search does. And it spits out a nice length Help Center article, not too long, not too short. And it has meaningful content at the start, and it has how-to content halfway through. Gives me a video template as well. And then I can really quickly do a video for the Help Center as well. Because I have the template, I don't really have to think about this. So it takes that burden of strategy off my mind a little bit for that. I take that content, I then can massage it, morph it into the final product. And all in all, that process probably takes me about 12 minutes now. So I'm saving a solid 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes, depending on the complexity of it. Now, Help Center articles, we're writing a lot of those, right? And we have to do it every single time we launch a new feature, which is often. So that is adding up. Every week, that's traction for me. Every week, that's something I can do. I get that time freed up and I can do something else. So that's one way for me to support and maintain this existing product. But I think as people are looking at launching new products, I mean, the ability to get started quicker, AI has obviously made that exponentially faster. Again, I think the most interesting thing here, though, is if we looked at the total market, how many designers and developers are there in the world, or in the United? Let's just look at the United States. In the United States, that are applying themselves to this practice and are really good designers and developers today. Well, I don't know. We'll say it's somewhere on the order of, I don't know, 100,000 in the Western Hemisphere, something like that. Okay, now open that world up. Now we have people from all sorts of different industries, accountants, uh, heck, police officers, people nights and you're doing nights and weekends to do their new entrepreneurial thing, nurses, teachers, students, people that have access to design and development now. What is the market size now for design and development? It's on the order of millions. Okay? And these are people that are going to be applying their whatever angle they have, whatever talent they have, whatever idea they have. They can apply it, become pretty good at it. There's going to be a segment of that group that becomes pretty good at it and launches stuff that actually works in the real world, just like this accountant. He was based out of Texas. Just like this accountant in Texas did. He was able to make stuff work that had real world value. How cool is that? I don't want those people taking my jobs. I don't think that they will take my job. I don't think they're going to take your job. But that market size is growing dramatically. I am curious to hear what everybody thinks the challenges along the way are going to be. So as we think about design and development merging, blurring together, everybody becoming a creator, what that looks like in reality. I don't think we have the excuse of siloing ourselves anymore. Even in large organizations, we have this issue right now. You're seeing people get laid off because of this issue. We have this issue of the silos are being broken down, and you have product managers who can now do a little bit of UX. They might not be great at it, right? You have UXers who can do a little bit of code. They might not be great at it, but they do a little bit of it. You have researchers who can now do a little bit of the design side. You have developers who can do a little bit of the design. You have this blur happening with the roles, and the silos are being broken down, for better or for worse. And companies are reacting to that. There's an argument to be made here. It's more about balance sheets than the roles, but the roles themselves are something that is breaking down. People are seeing less value in those siloed roles. So how are you forming up in your own skill set, in your own portfolio? How are you making yourself more attractive as a full stack designer or a full stack developer? Because I don't think we'll be able to get away with being so siloed for very much longer.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Joe. I appreciate the context setting and creating this space. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's not like everything's collapsing down, I feel like right now, especially in the web space where I'm primarily working. Maybe if you're working in a more emergent tech space where there's still a lot of interaction patterns that need to be established, like what do you do when you've got a VR or an AR or other kind of multimodal interactions? That requires maybe some more user research, some more conceptual thinking. But I think the web especially has come a long way, and a lot of the patterns for interaction are fairly stabilized, fairly standardized. Now there's some interesting developments happening, obviously, in the tech space with Arc and some other cool browser kind of updates. But I do really think, even as a UI designer myself, I'm a solo UI UX designer, been so for several years now. It just means I now have the opportunity to just leverage some of these tools, like you're saying, to go a little faster, get more of the kind of things done that I want to get done that I just haven't had the time to get done.
Yeah.
And I think that will basically empower those sort of folks who can take this sort of tool on to be even more productive. As far as the designer development kind of relationship, I feel like there's such a conceptual difference from design to development that I think that those two major like functions will always exist in the similar way that like an architecture and a contractor or like a builder or lead builder will probably always exist. An architect and a lead builder. And I think that's because primarily just the divergence and convergence sort of mental frames you have to
Mm-hmm.
engage in. Like,
Yeah, some
uh,
people are just wired to be developers. Some people are just wired to be creative designers.
yeah, and I think like even yeah, I just think divergence is such a different skill set and approach than when you're developing, you're primarily converging along a direction that's already been established. But when you're designing, you're kind of taking in all of these constraints and considerations that a developer would never even really have to think about. And as a designer, especially when it becomes scaled to like any kind of considerable degree, or if it's, maybe internal tools, I get exactly what you're saying. But as soon as I have to put this in front of external customers and there's security threats and there's, all kinds of like structural considerations for scaling and everything, uh, having someone who knows what they're doing, I think is key. It's kind of like, if I could build a shed on my property and it
Mm-hmm.
would stand up and it'd be fine. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
my father-in-law did this last year. He came over and built a shed. Now he's got construction experience. But if I and my father-in-law, who does mostly home builds, if we went and tried to
Mm-hmm.
build like a restaurant or something, it'd be a different kind of a problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Sam. I think there's a critical difference, and I have not seen this tackled yet. People can wave their hand or raise their hand if they feel like there's somebody attacking this, which is the nuance of excellent development is not that's there's nothing close to making that available to designers or to non-technical people. I've worked with so many CTOs, and the reason that they are so important for an organization is because they can see through all of the bloat. They can see through everything to see, where the company needs to be profitable, where the company and the code needs to be secure, where the code needs to be available in a split second. And at scale, there's a massive difference between code that's functional and code that is great. There's a massive disparity between those two things. And that's where good developers, good CTOs can bring a ton of value to a product and a business is there. And there's no AI tool that can get even close to that yet, or no code tool. And frankly, no designer who's not a developer or designer who's a full stack designer can get close to that level of optimization, security, the nuance of that. Not yet, at least, right? Maybe soon, maybe someday.
Sure. Yeah, and I found there's even a give and take when I might come with a solution that then they say, well, technically it's not just that we can't do this, but they might come to the other side and say we could
Mm-hmm.
do way more technologically that I didn't even know was possible. So
Yeah,
then I
yeah.
can expand the aperture a little bit.
Yeah, just the
I was gonna
benefits of collaborating with somebody who's different than you and thinks differently than you. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. I was gonna mention there's a guy, Fred Brooks, who did a lot of computer architecture kind of design, more from a hardware perspective back in the day. And he's
Mm-hmm.
written a lot of great articles. One of them is about, it's called No Silver Bullet. And he talks about the role of design in software engineering. And I think what you're describing around these tools is going to help increase what he calls this possibility for great designers. And he
Mm-hmm.
calls great designers people who not just conceptualize, but actually tinker around and turn
Mm-hmm.
the thing into a reality. Someone like inventing on the ground floor, more like your, Henry Ford types, just tinkering around and figuring it out. And
Yes.
in that case, I think it's great that these tools are coming around because you can get immediate feedback of like, oh, I
Yes.
designed this, I tried it, it worked, it didn't, and now I'll try something else. So I'm hoping we see just an influx of that single mind that can create something that's like a sort of 0 to 1.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
You nailed it, and that's 100% where my head is at with this. As I observe, is I see this being all this no code stuff that's popping up. It's gonna you can launch a website. That stuff is practical and lives on forever as long as the website lives on. But what is important here is UX people can now validate their ideas like that so quickly, so quickly. You have an idea, go build it. It's not going to be something that can scale to the size of Airbnb or Uber, but it's something you can validate really quickly. And so then how much does that move the responsibility of product design off of researchers and onto the designer, right? Or the responsibility of usability testing off of the UAT people and to the designer? A lot. It's a big deal. And I think that's where the collapse is happening. At least that's how I perceive it, is prototyping is becoming so much faster. Ultimately, you know what a timeless skill is, and this will remain true, AI or not AI, no code or not no code. The ability to inspire a vision in your customer or in your user or your company. The ability to inspire a vision is something that's the North Star, I think, for every designer as all these new tools arise and become great. You have to be able to latch onto that, and you have to be able to do that. So how do you do that? You can do that in a lot of different ways, but a key way that I'm seeing work really well: have that idea, diverge, become creative, think of all the different things you can do, and then narrow it into something and make something a reality using a no-code tool or using some level. Get to that idea faster with AI, but build something, deliver something quickly to validate and actually deliver real-world traction or real-world results with your users or with your customer that you can bring to the table and say, hey, this is working. And you can iterate. You can iterate on whatever you've done, make it better. I think it's an incredible opportunity for designers to latch onto that.
I think it takes away that sort of feeling of like, oh, I have this great idea, but I can't make it happen. So I'll just put that on the back burner for, when I finally reach out to that developer friend who just wants to work on something.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
I think too, you mentioned Airbnb and Uber. It's like they didn't scale to Airbnb and Uber size, or they couldn't when they first started either. So it's like definitely create those sort of version ones that
like micro testing and along the way. Micro test at the beginning, micro test along the way. Like little tests is the new research. Actually getting stuff into the real world and having a little bit of a reaction to it. Man, we could go in so many different directions with this conversation, but one thing that I've been noticing too, obviously a lot of researchers have been laid off in the industry in the last couple months, which is really hard to see because I see the value of research and understand the implicit value that I have done it myself in so many different ways. But the thing that I've seen work in the real world over and over again is not so much like exhaustive front-end research, but more so those micro experiments along the way. And I think maybe that's what some of these businesses are reacting to is like, let's roll this research capacity of our business into the process, into the sprints, into the way that we're doing things, and have people do it on the fly, for better or for worse. There's also a little bit of a revolt around agile I've seen recently, and this is really interesting to me. I know I've kind of waffled between this with Lead Scout too, because with the business that I ran, we launched a service even before we had a UI or a product out to the public. We launched a service and people could pay for it. So we had subscribers before we ever had a login. It was this cool feeling to say we were making revenue before we ever had the product out, right? And we had some code behind it. We were doing some things. It was essentially like a software-enabled agency at first, but the users didn't have any sort of login, and so it was this amazing feeling of saying like we're doing this the right way. We're iterating every couple weeks. We're launching something new. We got down to revenue really quickly. It's great. The drawback of that, so that's kind of like true agile, in my mind, that was true agile, just building with the user and really being tuned into their feedback and everything, right? The drawback to that we found was you're so ingrained with the user, you don't have time for your product. And it was like this weird yin yang I didn't see coming at the time, where I was thinking, man, we're doing this the right way. This is the way I've always been taught as a user experience designer. And then before we knew it, we were too sidelined by the users and maintaining our relationships and maintaining that with that. It was like they were all consuming, and we had to take so much time to maintain those relationships that we couldn't invest the amount of time that we needed into the product. It was something like we're spending 28 hours a week on the customers and had that extra 12 hours for the product, and we needed it to be reversed, right?
Is that spending time helping them get set up, getting them
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
acquainted with the product? And you work with roofers primarily, right? So less.
Yeah, we were working with more of a non-technical base, and so it was, it was 100% onboarding, but continued onboarding too. So helping them manage the service day to day because they're non-technical users, right? So
Sure.
so it became this thing because our solution wasn't fully built out when we launched it. They needed the handholding. In retrospect, it's like if I was to do some things differently with it, I actually would have built in stealth mode for longer, which I feel a little bit dirty saying that. As a UXer, I'm like get it out there as quick as possible, but it's almost like you want it to be self-service enough where people can handle it, use the product without hand holding, so that they don't become a suck on your time. Unless you have infinite resources, then go for it, right? We didn't. And so it's this interesting thing. And I see the same trend happening with Agile today where people are saying uh, um, there's kind of two sides to the thing. Like one is people are saying stuff is not defined well enough and we're getting started on it. And so it just becomes this kind of convoluted mess of like loose wires everywhere. We need to define stuff more and then we can tackle it. So that's one part of this revolt against agile practices at times. The other revolt I'm seeing is people objecting to the cost of agile over time on the backside of it. So it's like you get people into this process and then it just starts to churn and the machine starts to run over and over again, and then you kind of forget what value you're delivering, but you have another sprint delivery happening. So it's like you gotta have that, and you gotta have all the butts and seats filled, all this stuff, and it just becomes a cost center for your business. It becomes a really big problem.
Yeah.
I would say that latter thing is just you're not really doing agile, you're just doing process. So it's like you got to get back to the fundamentals with
Yeah,
that.
it's so thorny, and it's so thorny across different scale businesses. We
Hmm.
ran at my last company, we did SAFe, or they were just implementing
Yeah,
it while I was getting there.
yeah,
And it was a mid-sized education firm, and
yeah.
that
How did that
did
go for you
honestly,
all?
I think it helped improve the intercompany kind of interdepartment communication, and also it was like when the team that I was on, the developers were on board with it, and they wanted
Mm-hmm.
to commit to that, and so I think it worked out pretty well because there's just some like fundamentals that if you're not doing it, it makes development really hard. Like doing every couple of weeks, just reviewing what needs to be done over the next, few
Yeah.
weeks. Now I left that company in part because I ended up being more of a product manager who was doing 15
Mm.
hours of meetings a week. And I was like, this is not, and they were
No,
all
thank
Zoom
you.
meetings because of COVID. And so that wasn't my favorite, but I think from a efficiency and effective standpoint, it was better than just not having any kind of company wide
Yeah,
process. Now, on a smaller team, like I work on a small team now, literally me and two other engineers, it's like we don't have any, like,
I bet that's refreshing, huh?
it's awesome. We get together the first day of the week and we're like, okay, this is what we're working on this week. Okay, let's go after it. And then the end of the week, we review it and we're like, okay, what do we need to talk about? Anything? Okay. And then obviously you can reach out on Slack anytime if there's an issue or question. So yeah, it's a night and day difference, but at different levels of scale, you do need a different level of process, I feel like.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I completely agree. You just can't lose sight of the what's important, which is providing value. And I think process always tends to get in the way of that. That those SOPs tend to get in the way of the value providing. Okay, I want to wrap this up, but before we do, quick question for you. So again, the original comment here was I think the lines between design and development will continue to blur more and more. Ultimately, we'll all just become makers. Interesting tidbit of thought. So here's the question to close this out. What skills won't go away?
yeah, I mean, obviously you've got the normal just intercommunication skills that are going to stick around. But I think the one that matters that I've really been trying to dig into and drill into is the capacity to understand that there's a difference between the thing we're making, the person we're making it for, or persons or sets of people, and the relationship between those persons and that thing. And I think that that relationship is a altogether different thing. So the people who most UX people really spend a lot of time understanding that dynamic, understanding that relationship. I think that doesn't change no matter what. And if you've got a person who usually from an engineering background is focused on how you build this thing, and maybe you've got someone from a business background saying, well, how do we which customers should we focus to, and they know a lot about them. But there's always going to be that relationship between these two things.
Mm-hmm.
And we stand poised to continue to actually drive the kind of impact and value that having a deep understanding of that relationship can afford.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's all in the relationships. Yeah, I learn that more every year. All right, well, let's end with that. That's a great nightcap on this conversation. I appreciate y'all joining.
Thanks, man. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, yeah. Hope you all have a great afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you're at. Talk soon.